Hey, folks, from what I understand, we're going to start in about 2 minutes. Is that correct? It's 2 minutes past. And we'll just find out when our countdown goes off. So we have a sizable crowd that watches these things on live streams. And so we're trying to make sure we get all those folks linked in. So once we see where the live stream countdown is, we'll get started here in just a minute. Thank you all for coming out. 1 minute and 20 seconds. I can feel the anticipation building. It's palpable, isn't it? It's just, but again, thank you all for coming, and thanks to the library. It's such a beautiful space. It's so good to be back here. So good to be back here. Okay, let's see. Probably about 30 seconds now. Welcome to In the Room. It's our monthly series of in-person conversations with Connecticut's political leaders. I'm John Dankosky of the Connecticut Mirror. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors are the Mohegan Tribe, Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Eversource, Clifton Larson Allen, the Causeway Agency, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, and Rowthorne Law. Just a nice round of applause for all the people who help to make these events possible for the Connecticut Mirror. We're here today at the Hartford Public Library in downtown Hartford. It's one of the great treasures in the center of the state. Beautiful facility, new facility here, and we're very happy to be back here. We'll say some more about the library in just a little bit. Before we get to our guest, I just have to quickly say that if you value events like these and if you value the journalism that the Connecticut Mirror does, and you haven't made a donation recently to the Connecticut Mirror, now through December 31st, all gifts are being matched dollar for dollar, up to $5,000 per gift. Yes, it's just like a public radio fundraiser. You can use the card on your seat if you're here with the QR code, or you can donate via our website, ctmirror.org. Of course, if you're watching the live stream, you can go to ctmirror.org and click on the donate button. Okay, all that business is out of the way, so I want to introduce my guest, Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz. Lieutenant Governor, great to see you once again.
Thank you so much. It's nice to see you in person.
I know.
And not in a dark radio studio and at a public library. I grew up in public libraries. I love libraries.
Oh, I love libraries so much. I have a library just around the corner from my house in Winstead that I can walk to, and it's just such a gem to have that. And people, I think, who don't take advantage of public libraries just don't understand all the things that you can do with them. So yes, big fan of public libraries and a big fan of getting a chance to talk to people in person as opposed to over Zoom, which we've done for such a long period of time. For this series, as we were talking about before, we're talking to some of our elected leaders about, some of the things that drive them, some of the things that are in the past in their careers. But before we get to some of those things, Lieutenant Governor, I guess we need to talk with you about what just happened. The election that just happened not so very long ago. I was watching, I think, and maybe it was through the Mirror's website, there's a press conference that you were at with a bunch of other political leaders from the Democratic Party, including the governor. Mm-hmm. And I'll say this, I've seen a lot of these press conferences after losses, after days in which things didn't go well. And, people sort of look like, okay, well, there's another day. You and the rest of that group look legitimately thoughtful and reflective and very sad about what had just happened. And I guess I'm wondering if you can go back to that day and sort of how you felt knowing that Connecticut is still a blue state, but Donald Trump's going to be the next president again.
And I think what the governor and I focused on was letting the people of Connecticut know that we understand their concerns and that nonetheless, we are going to stand up for Connecticut values, like reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus rights, labor rights, civil rights, voting rights, the right to read what you'd like to read, freedom of thought and expression, and also because we are a state of immigrants. I think what unites all of us is that our forebears came from somewhere else, unless we're indigenous, and the only difference among us is when our relatives came. And so the governor and I believe that people who come from other countries bring talent, work ethic, skills, culture, vibrancy. They help our economy. I mean, we need to fill 100,000 jobs. So we want people who come wanting to work hard and make their life better, because those people make our state better and stronger.
So what specifically are you and the governor planning to do to make sure that immigrants, including immigrants who are here in Connecticut without documentation, are able to continue to live in the state?
Well, look, we want people who are tax-paying and law-abiding to keep doing what they're doing, raising their families, helping our economy, paying taxes. All that is really important. And of course, if people aren't law-abiding, whether they're citizens or not, well, then there are consequences to that.
But what specifically do you think Connecticut is ready to do to fight a Trump administration that has said, look, there are going to be massive roundups of immigrants who are here without documentation, including places like Connecticut, where they've been more welcomed than in other states?
And I think we're just going to have to see sort of what unfolds. But I would take you back to the last Trump presidency and remind you that people were taking residence in churches or seeking public support because they own businesses that were key in the community. So we are going to be very proactive, and we are going to help people because that's what we've done in the past, and we're going to continue to do that. And I will say that a friend of mine, Dana Buchan, she is a renowned immigration lawyer here in Connecticut, and she has advised that people who are not citizens who would like to apply should do that sooner than later, because the date you apply is key, and once you've applied, you will be protected under federal law as it stands now. So there are immigration lawyers who are now out in communities providing legal advice about how to help families who are here.
I'd like to get to some of the other issues that, of course, are going to be coming up quite a bit during a Trump presidency, but let's go back to that date and what exactly happened. I think both the governor, Senator Murphy, many other national Democrats have all been saying some version of the same thing. The Democratic Party took their eye off the ball of middle class, working class Americans and the things that they care most about. Is that your read somewhat on what happened? I mean, how do you view it?
I would say at the national level that inflation trumped democracy. I would say that the Democratic economic message did not appeal to the majority of the voters, unfortunately. I will say, I will contrast that to the elections here in Connecticut. So in our state, the majority party, the Democratic Party, won 6 more seats in the legislature, and we'll see what happens in the Seminara-Honig recount. But if the recount holds the election night results, then we will have picked up a seat in the state Senate. So we won seats. Why was that? It's because we've had 6 balanced budgets, 2 big tax cuts. We've paid down $8 billion of debt, and we've used the payment that we saved from those debt payments to invest in people, in things that are really important and make a difference, like expanded child care, job training, free community college, and more. And that economic message clearly appealed to people because we picked up seats based on that record.
Also, though, what happened, and we've been reporting at the Connecticut Mirror quite a bit about this, really low turnout in many cities, actually lower turnout than the last couple of elections in many other municipalities, not just including cities. So while Democrats did well, picked up seats in the state legislature, it seemed as though there was an enthusiasm gap amongst Democrats across the state, just like across the rest of the country. Is that something that concerns you, and what do you think happened there?
So it does, because I was very hopeful that early voting would yield a bigger voter turnout. So in 2020, the voter turnout was 80% average statewide. And this presidential election, it's somewhere between 74 and 75%. And so that was tremendously disappointing to me. And to look at some of the city turnouts, Hartford went from a 2020 turnout of just over 50% to 43% this time. Bridgeport went from 71% in 2020 to 52%. So we lost a lot of voters in the cities, and that is very concerning.
Why do you think that happened?
So I think one reason is this. We have a lot of uncontested state representative and state Senate seats, and the thing in cities are the primaries, right? So there were primaries for state Senate and state representative that were very lively in Bridgeport. And then everyone was uncontested or had very nominal opponents in the general election. And the same was true for Hartford. Same was true in New Haven. And I know when I was Secretary of the State, I was always really disappointed when there weren't candidates to run against sitting state representatives and sitting state senators, because those folks are on the front lines of knocking on the doors, making the phone calls, sending the text to remind people to vote. And so, you know, when you have a third or more of the legislators that don't have opponents, that doesn't make for lively elections, that's for sure.
But I think part of the thing you point to is, so it's not just lively elections, but then you have a primary system that is, I mean, we talked about this for years when you were Secretary of the State. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the primaries happen at a time when people aren't around to vote. The numbers aren't anywhere near what they should be.
You're talking about the August primaries, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk to you about early voting and some of the things that I think actually have worked well, that got started well while you were in that job. But I mean, if we fix the primary system, that really helps. There's this huge chunk of unaffiliated voters that don't get a chance to vote in primaries. And this is gigantic chunk of people, and they feel disenfranchised in terms of voting in the actual election that matters.
And I always say to people, hey, if you're unaffiliated and you want to vote in a Republican or Democratic primary, just change right before vote, change back if you must. But I always try to encourage people in Connecticut to register with a party because you have the chance to make a bigger difference and to help choose the candidates.
Or you could travel to the very, as everyone knows, progressive state of South Carolina, where my parents live, where you don't register as a Republican or Democrat. You show up and you vote in a primary. You don't have to tell anybody that you're part of a party. This is South Carolina, folks.
So
why don't we do it like that?
I always wonder about that. Okay, so if I'm gonna, I would love to vote in a Republican primary. I'm a Democrat, right? Because then I'm going to be voting for the candidate that I think is the weakest. So I always scratch my head at that one.
But you could also vote for a candidate that you actually like. You could make a primary something that's competitive.
So if you're in South Carolina, you got to pick a primary to vote in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you pick a primary. But this is the thing. I think often we hear, well, an unaffiliated voter could just do this. Well, maybe the state could figure out a way to make it easier for them to vote.
Well, and here's the thing. Right now in Connecticut, it's not a statute. It's not a law that says that. It's each party wants to incentivize people to join their party. So they say, in order to vote in a primary, you got to be registered.
And
with
which
that party
has more power in the state of Connecticut? So I'm just wondering. Okay, so let's move past that and talk about the fact that
you should talk to your legislator about that.
Early voting. Yeah, he really wants to hear this from me. Early voting seemed like it was a success, even if numbers were down. This was a really good step for the state. Oh, my goodness.
It was a huge success. We had 740,000 people that showed up over the 2-week period to vote. And so many people showed up. The governor, on the first day, we decided that he was going to go on the first day and I was going to wait a week, so we could kind of push people and remind people. He thought the line was too long on day one in Greenwich. So he went, said hi to people, and went back another day. The day that I went, Middletown, there was a line out the door. I thought it was great. To have, there were days where 50,000 people voted per day. And in places like Greenwich, and this is interesting, so Greenwich is a place where you have people that go to New York and get on early trains and come back late. One of the most popular voting days was Sunday for the folks in Greenwich, because everyone was like, oh, I'm going to Greenwich Avenue to get coffee. I'm going to go to the town hall and vote. So I thought that part worked out really well. 122,000 people voted by absentee ballot. So when you take those numbers together, that was a good chunk of people that got voting out of the way when it was convenient. And it's interesting because now I want to see, since we said that absentee ballot voting can happen for any reason, not just because you're out of town or you're sick, but for any reason, just because it's convenient. So I'll be curious to see how many people choose that route.
In one of these conversations at another library down in Stamford, I was talking with the Secretary of the State about this several weeks ago before the election. And one thing I think that we both agreed on was that people didn't really know how to do this, but yet it still kind of worked. There wasn't a clear, understandable message. Did you sense that? Did you sense that
early voting?
About early voting, about absentee ballots, about what you were actually voting for on the ballot when you were asked a question about absentee ballots? Did you think that this was all clear enough?
So, okay, I will tell you that I did a lot of education with people about early voting to let them know, and I'll try to do a lot of education, as I know she did, about absentee ballot voting. And there were organizations, I see some folks in the AARP shirts, so the AARP was supportive of the absentee ballot initiative. There were different voting rights groups that were supporting this, AFL-CIO. There was a coalition of organizations that were over 1 million people between the AFL, ARP, League of Women Voters. Did the message get out to enough people? Probably not, but it did win by, I think, over 60%. So now the legislature has to go and figure out, okay, how are we going to make that work and how are we going to implement that, just like they did with early voting. If I had my little magic wand, I would have liked to see us do the absentee ballot voting first, and then maybe we wouldn't need the 2 weeks of early voting. I don't know. So we're going to have to probably
I like the 2 weeks of early voting. I was the first.
Do too.
My wife and I were the first 2 people to vote in Winstead on the first day. 10 o'clock was very exciting. By the way, I think that the ARP folks follow me around to these events. They've been to several of these things. I think it's because I just turned 55, but I have no idea why. I don't know if they're trying to do something.
It's a group of very smart women, so it recommends you well.
So just very quickly, before we move past this election, have you and the governor and other Democratic leaders, have you talked, though, about sort of the messaging, the way that the Democratic Party was perceived this time around, whether or not you did well in the state legislative races? The fact is that people didn't turn out. There wasn't the enthusiasm. It didn't show up here, just like it didn't show up in almost all the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. What conversations have you been having about like what the Democratic Party is doing wrong right now?
Well, look, I think it's very clear we have to focus on pocketbook and wallet issues. So what are those? It's, what can we do to make electricity and utilities more affordable in our state? Because we're the 3rd highest in the country, and you're going to see some initiatives during this upcoming legislative session. Housing costs are crazy expensive, and so we're going to be focusing on affordability. The price of groceries, and that's a little harder to deal with at the state level, but people need to be laser focused on affordability, and so that's what we're doing. And we always do that, but it's a message, I think, to the National Democratic Party that has to be first and foremost.
I will say that you mentioned the success that Governor Lamont and yourself have had over the course of the last several years in terms of getting our big deficit under control, paying down some of the state's big debts, huge problems that we've had that are starting to head in the right direction. There are many people, I think, who are part of the Democratic Party, though, who have said to the governor, at the state capitol and also at events like this, hey, look, we're doing very well. The rainy day fund is a much bigger fund than it used to be. Should we invest more of those dollars in social services and in helping people who are struggling right now with some of the very things you just talked about?
Oh, that is going to be the focus of the legislative session, right? And first of all, I would just say that because we've gotten the state back on strong fiscal footing by paying down that $8 billion in debt, that frees up an additional $750 million every year that you save in debt service to invest in a time to own program, which has helped thousands of young families buy their first home. It's helped us expand child care, which is the infrastructure to opening up our economy. And I should have mentioned that when we were talking about affordability, because child care, if you have 2 kids in child care, that could cost you $2,000 a month. It could be more than your mortgage payment, right? So these are things I think that will be the focus. And also, look, we made record investments in higher education, both for UConn and the state university system. Last budget go-round, I assume that we will be hearing from higher educational institutions again. We know that homelessness is up because of the high housing costs, and we know that our nonprofits that do so much really good work for the people of our state need help. So we will be having those discussions, I know, in a very robust way session.
What do you think that the state can or should do about the high housing costs? I mean, one of the big issues is just the availability of what is considered to be affordable housing. And I think if you look at the numbers, that's not even necessarily affordable to a lot of people. An issue that happens in the state, and has happened here forever because of the way that we're governed, is that some towns just say, we don't want so much affordable housing. And other towns are like, sure, I guess that this is part of what we do. How much of a lever do you think the governor has right now to be able to talk to cities and say, and towns, we need to build more housing that more people can afford to buy or live in?
Yep. So we just expanded our time to own program and put in an additional $40 million to help first-time home buyers with closing costs and with down payment help, because those two things make it really tough to buy a house. And so that program has been hugely successful. So we are doing that. Our administration has committed $900 million to incentivize developers to build affordable housing. And the governor is looking for ways to incentivize the private sector and towns to be developing more workforce and more affordable housing. And, you know, if there are towns that aren't participating, then if they want state funds, you know, I think the governor likes the idea of financial incentives to try to accomplish that. And the legislature is going to be back trying to pass legislation to encourage more affordable housing. Unfortunately, it didn't get across the finish line last session. We have a long session this time, and I know people like Jason Rojas, who's very passionate about this, will put that front and center.
You mentioned education as well. You were just part of an event today launching a new student loan reimbursement program. What can you tell us about that program?
So today, I was with state representatives Corey Paris and Eleni Cavro-DeGras and Representative Tony Walker to announce that there's a $16 million investment in helping people who have student loan debt. And most people in Connecticut would be surprised, I think, to know that there are 500,000 people in our state that owe student loan debt, and the average is $40,000. And the problem with that is it's hard, especially if you're just recently out of school, to buy a house, start a family, get married, start a business. And so what this bill does is say that if you've been a Connecticut resident for 5 years, that you can get $5,000 per year for a total of $20,000 to pay down your student loan debt. And think about it, if the average debt is $40,000, to knock $20,000 off of that is a big deal. And you can do that, but you have to meet the criteria. You need documentation that you've lived in the state for 5 years, and you must do 50 hours of volunteer work at a nonprofit in the state. And I love that because I know so many young people who are mission driven. They want to do something to make a difference in their community. And what a way to get rid of student loan debt and make a difference in a community.
It seems also like the sort of effort that a state can do when the federal government isn't able to do it, right? The federal government famously has tried to tackle the problem of student debt, and it's had problems in the courts, let's just put it that way. But it's the sort of thing that on a smaller scale, the state is able to do. And I would guess that you and the governor are probably looking at different ways to do that, right? How do we take the lead on this?
And we have also in the healthcare space, because we have started a program, and there was funding at the federal level to do this, but we've used ARPA money to help those in the healthcare professions. A lot of them are women, nurses or physicians or mental health workers. And by the way, try to make an appointment if you need a mental health professional or even a general practitioner or doctor appointment. It's hard. And so our program helps people in the healthcare field pay down their debt, because we want to incentivize those providers to stay in our state. So we have our own program that our Department of Health created, and this is a different one with the legislature. I'm very curious to see how this works. We think 100,000 people will be eligible to participate, and the higher ed institutions have had their phones ringing off the hook from folks who are interested in applying. And I should also say, you should know that women and women of color are more likely to have student debt. And so I think this is really important from a pay equity standpoint, because if you think about all the underpaid positions, teaching, nursing, social work, all things dominated by women, where student loan debt could be higher because they're making lower salaries. So that could significantly impact people in a positive way.
Before we move too far away from education, the other big piece of education news today is, for the second administration in a row, it seems another longtime Connecticut resident is set up to be the Secretary of Education. One Linda McMahon has been tapped by incoming President Donald Trump. Your reaction?
I have to say that I was a little surprised by that, because I don't know that she has an expertise in education, and it could be the point, because we've heard in Project 2025 that the Federal Department of Education would go away. And to me, that would be a tremendous tragedy. Our state relies so much on federal funding for education. It wouldn't be a surprise to me if Linda McMahon had gotten her first choice to be Commerce Secretary. She was the head of the Small Business Administration, but I was surprised because I don't think of her in the education space.
You mean to tell me that you believe that one of Donald Trump's appointees is not qualified for the position that he appointed them for?
I will say,
I'm shocked, actually, to hear you say that, Lieutenant Governor.
I didn't say that she wasn't qualified. I don't think she has the background or expertise in education.
So what, like at the state level, what happens if the federal education department goes away? Like, what does that mean to Connecticut?
Well, I guess we'd have to see how that was done in legislation, but it would mean that those federal employees who work in the education department would lose their jobs, and it might potentially mean that our state would lose hundreds of millions of dollars in education funding.
And so if that happens, then
all of
happens?
Then there's our state would have fewer resources to give municipalities, and everybody who owns a home and who pays property taxes or sends their kids to a school should be concerned about that, because most towns or cities have budgets where 75 to 80% of their budget is for education. It's a core mission of government.
As you said, we'll see what happens. Another thing, of course, that you're very involved in is women's rights and women's health. I guess I'm wondering what challenges you specifically see ahead, especially here in Connecticut under the new Trump administration.
So we've already started to see the results because the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade immediately set off a number of states, more than 17 states, that have severely restricted or made abortion illegal. So because we passed the Reproductive Freedom Act, we have allowed women to come from other states where these procedures might be illegal. And so abortion numbers have gone up by 23% in our state because we are taking care of women. And by the way, there are 28 million women of reproductive age who live in states where abortion is either restricted or illegal. And we should all be concerned about that because the Guttmacher Institute estimates that there were 65,000 rapes in those states. So I shudder to think about what those women are going through and what they have to do in order to get care, or people who need procedures for their own health care.
How do you potentially work with other states that similarly have passed legislation that protects abortion rights for those who bear children? I mean, is there a way in which Connecticut can not just stand alone on this, but can work with other states that have similar ideas?
Yes, and so here's what we're doing in both. The governor has joined the Reproductive Rights Coalition of governors nationally. I think there are 20 states in the governor's coalition, and I led the charge to organize lieutenant governors, and there are 21 of us that are working together to see what are the best practices, what are states doing to protect reproductive rights. And I think there are other issues that could come up. One of the other Project 2025 goals is to get the FDA to ban the use of mifepristone, which has been used safely by millions of women for abortion. And we have to prepare for that because I think that is something that probably we will have to face. Right now, I do want to be very clear that the right to an abortion here in Connecticut is legal, it's safe, and it's protected, but we don't know what will happen with future Supreme Court cases or with legislation, say, banning certain types of abortion medication.
You've mentioned Project 2025 a couple times. How seriously do you take that set of, whatever we'll call it, proposals, this gigantic paper full of ideas about how to transform government?
Yeah, so I think that you're going to see it in terms of either the president's legislative agenda, or individual senators and congresspeople are going to use that to inform legislation that they propose in this upcoming session.
I have a couple questions here from our members, people who read the Connecticut Mirror and support us. One person wrote in and says, how will you help to protect LGBTQ plus community in the future? I'm particularly concerned about our trans community. Yes,
so I have to say first that there's a lot of concern in the community, and there was a rally this past weekend on Sunday organized by West Hartford Pride, and there were 1,000 people there. And so Senator Blumenthal was there, our Attorney General, William Tong, was there, and we each talked about what we plan to do. The senator talked about legislation he was going to introduce in Washington. The Attorney General talked about how he will be joining with like-minded attorneys general to make sure that people's rights are protected. But I'm really glad you brought up transgender youth, because the governor said on that day after the election that he was very concerned about transgender youth in our state, and we want to do what we can to protect our young people, because the risk of suicide is very high in that community, and there's a lot of hate. Sadly, some in our state, but certainly around the country, that is of great concern to parents. So just in my office today, I met with a group that's very concerned about LGBTQ plus curriculum in schools, wanting to make sure that that community is represented in school curriculum, that schools don't ban books with LGBTQ plus characters, concerned about healthcare procedures, and they are talking now to policymakers and legislators about specific legislation to continue to protect the LGBTQ plus community, because here in Connecticut, we have very strong laws that make discrimination on the basis of identity illegal, and that protect folks from hate, but it's a scary time for a lot of people. And so I know our legislature is going to be considering all kinds of proposals, and I should say we now have a bigger LGBTQ plus caucus. MJ Shannon was elected, and also John Santinella from Enfield. MJ's from Milford. So now we have 5 people in our LGBTQ plus House caucus, and I know that they are going to be very concerned and working on that issue as well. But in Connecticut, we're very proud that we are one of the best states in the country for the LGBTQ plus community, and we're proud of that.
At what point in your life did you decide that you wanted to go into politics?
Oh my goodness. So I was always interested in politics. I just thought it was fun to learn about, fun to read about. When I was in high school, I went to Laurel Girls State, and that's a program that the American Legion puts on to teach kids about how a bill becomes a law, and to help kids learn about civics. And so I went when I was a junior in high school, and Ella Grasso was the governor. And so there I was in the Jorgensen Auditorium amidst a group of very noisy high school girls, about 200 of us. And then this hush fell, and I could see this very dignified woman kind of going down the front aisle, and I realized that it was Governor Grasso. And I remember her talking to us about how she helped people every day as governor, you know, and I remember thinking, oh, you know, maybe someday I would like to do that work. You know, and then I went to college, went to law school, got married, had a baby, and it was my husband, actually, who made the comment at the kitchen table that maybe I should run for office. And it came up because we're at the kitchen table reading the paper, and my husband sees that our state representative was retiring, and he said, oh, you should do that. And my first reaction is, how can I do that? We have a 5-month-old. Our daughter Ava was 5 months old. And then I just, over the next couple of days, kept looking at my daughter and kept thinking, you know, I could stop worrying about her future, and I could actually start doing something about it. So it was my husband, and everything in life that's impactful seems to happen at the kitchen table, right?
That's an interesting story. So you start down this path, right? Because when you first start, you probably don't know exactly what you're doing. I mean, how did you turn that kitchen table conversation into, like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then all of a sudden, I'm elected. I'm in
right.
office. Like,
yeah. So So I went up the street to my neighbor, Maria Holtzberg, who later became the mayor of Middletown. And I went up the street to see my friend Maria, who I knew had worked on a mayor campaign. And I went to see my friend Marion Newberg, and I had conversations at their kitchen tables and said, hey, I'm thinking about maybe doing this. Can you tell me, how did you run that mayor's campaign? Marion had been our Democratic leader in Middletown for years, and they told me what to do. You got to go door knocking, and so off I went to do it. And what was remarkable is along the way, the conversations that I had with people, and they gave me, my future constituents gave me the best ideas about what would make their life better. And then I realized that, like door knocking, policymaking becomes an addiction, because you see how you can use a good idea, advocate for it, and get a bill passed. And it's really addictive because you see how those conversations matter and how you could do good things for people.
So you saw the actual progress. You saw that you were doing good stuff. What's one thing that across your entire political career you say, this is the thing I'm most proud of?
Oh my goodness. It's okay. So I'm going to have to say three things. Okay. One, when I was in the legislature, Kristen Zarfos, breast cancer surgeon, said, Susan, we got to do something. Insurance companies are making me send mastectomy patients home the same day. Mm-hmm. And then women were developing infections, and she said, we got to do something. So we did a bill to ban what we call drive-through mastectomies.
For that.
And then Rosa DeLauro went to the Congress and did that at the federal level. And since 1 in 8 women are expected to develop breast cancer in their lifetime, I think that was something that was really, really important. And I couldn't have done it without Kristen Zarfos saying, this is a huge problem and we need help. And then I think there are 2 initiatives that the governor and I fought for and wanted to do when we took the oath of office in 2019, and one was to raise the minimum wage, and it now will be $16.35 come January 1st, and that will uplift 170,000 families, many headed by women in our state. So I'm very proud of that, and also our paid leave program. It's something that we wanted to do so that people could welcome new babies, take care of themselves if they're sick or a sick spouse, and now 150,000 families have taken advantage of that, and it hasn't cost the state a lot of money because a tiny portion of your paycheck, goes to that, and I think that has really made a big difference, to the point where young people have told me that they've read about that program and decided that they wanted to come to Connecticut because when they had their first child, they wanted to be able to have 12 weeks with the baby.
Oh. Okay, so those are 3 good ones. So you can give me 3 of these, or you can just give me one. What's something that, looking back, you just would have done differently?
Oh, my goodness. That's, you make a lot of mistakes. Who knows? There was that crazy attorney general idea that I had, but oh well. Here I am.
I so appreciate you bringing that up and me not having to, but it was an idea you had.
It was an idea I had, and it didn't work out, but I am tenacious, so here I sit.
Okay. Well, so yeah, and that was obviously a little bit of a political setback. You've run for higher office a couple of times. You're lieutenant governor now. I think it's fair to say, and you probably hear this a lot, that most people in the state don't know exactly what the lieutenant governor does for their work. Okay, so take me through just, I mean, you don't have to give me like the whole day, but like, what is the job? Now that you've been in it for a while, how do you define what the job of Lieutenant Governor is?
So there is a statutory and a constitutional role, and so I preside over the state Senate in the same way that the Vice President presides over the U.S. Senate. I also am the governor when the governor goes out of state. So those are the two things that I must do, right? And then, like any other job, it's, you know, as big as you make it, right? So I view my role as making sure that I am carrying out our administration's policy agenda. So every day I am out prosecuting our policy initiatives. And it could be that we have a budget agenda. And so I will be going to communities across the state to garner support for our budget, for any legislative proposals that we have. And you will also find me in communities across the state letting people know what our state has invested in their community, cleaning up a brownfield, helping to build affordable housing, helping to rebuild a bridge, a school. So we do so much to impact every community across the state. That is a huge job in and of itself, because I want people to know how we've made a positive difference in their town.
So, of course, you're a key part of the administration of Governor Ned Lamont. How much do you sit down with the governor and say, I think this should be our priority? And he talks back to you and says, I think this should be our priority. I mean, do you have those sorts of conversations on a regular basis?
Every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk every day. And I would say 99% of the time we agree and we are aligned. You know, there are a tiny number of things where we don't agree and we agree not to agree, you know. But most of the time we agree, and we have a back and forth, and a lot of it is also informed by our commissioners, our cabinet members, if you will. If they see needs, they tell us. If we see needs, we say, hey, we need to be doing more with housing. What can we do? And that's how we work together. I think we collaborate very well. You know, there are some lieutenant governors who don't talk to their governors, which is kind of shocking to me, or governors who don't rely on their lieutenant governors. And the other great thing about having a team is, you know, even though we have 169 towns in our small state, it's still a big state when you start driving around to town. So the governor will often say, hey, I'm going to this side of the state, you go to that side of the state, and we laugh about it. But I think because both of us are very energetic, we're both on the road a lot because we want to talk to people and learn about what they need or what they care about. It lets us do more because we're both out there working hard.
Okay, so earlier in this series, I sat down with the governor and I asked him about his intentions to stay in the job, and he told me at the time he has every intention of running for another term. How does that make you feel?
So first of all, I love working with the governor, and it's not about the role, it's about the work. And I look at what we've done and think we could do a whole lot more, you know, over the next 2 years. And if we're still working together over the next 4 years, I think we've been a formidable team. We put the state back onto sound fiscal footing. We are leading on so many things: reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus rights, labor rights, civil rights, you know, and we're investing in things that people care about and that people need. like community college, like job training, childcare. We've invested a lot in our state's infrastructure. Either way, it would be great.
If he decides not to run again, do you expect to run for governor?
I'll think about it.
You'll think. I had another conversation with Richard Blumenthal, and the senator is 78 years old, and I said, is this too old to do this? And he's like, no, it's not too old. I'm going to keep doing it. Do you think, look, I believe I had this right. You're 63 years old. You've been in politics for quite some time.
Yep.
You're at the age that if you were in a normal job, you'd start to think about, it's time to retire. Maybe go, just enjoy myself for a little bit. But in politics, it doesn't seem that way, right? And if you're lieutenant governor for another 2 years, and maybe you run for governor, or you're the lieutenant governor for another 4 years, it starts to get to the point where, you've had a very long career. Do you ever think about that piece of it, about ending this career, not getting to be a governor, to be a senator, to be one of those things that you reached for?
You know what? I'll say this. First of all, every time, it's time to think about, okay, am I running for re-election? Am I going to run for another job? I've always looked at it this way. Gee, I would put it all out there to run for that job. And if the voters think that's a good idea, great. And if not, trust me, I could go and have a nice life. I have a great family. I would love to hang out with my kids, my husband, more, and I would have fun doing that. And I have done that. Half my career was in the private sector. And I would happily go back to that. Love practicing law, love helping my clients when I was practicing law. But what is also great is helping people not just expand their business and create jobs, but helping people on a macro level.
Okay, so last very important question. I haven't gotten to see you as much recently in the last couple of years.
You don't get out enough, clearly.
I know, exactly. But I always run into you at the Greek Festival in Hartford. I run into you a couple times at the Greek Festival in Hartford.
Oh my goodness, they make the best spanakopita at St. George's.
They do, don't they?
Delicious.
But so here's my question.
It's not as good as my Aunt Anne's, but it's pretty good.
But so you have Greek and Polish heritage.
I do.
I have Polish and Ukrainian heritage, so I have some of the same. Greek food or Polish food?
Both.
Now you can't say both. This isn't like I can choose three. This is like you have to say Greek food or Polish food.
Which would I pick? Okay.
Which would you pick? You had to have some just. Right
yeah, probably Greek. Although I just love a good cabbage and mushroom pierogi.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good answer. I think you're right. Even though I grew up with Polish food, I would also probably pick Greek food.
Yeah, you know what? It's more. I have to say, it's more vegetable centric than Polish food. Polish food is very meat based. A lot of potatoes.
Yeah, very potato centric. Yes, it's a potato centric cuisine.
And just so you know, I did grow up on a potato farm. So when you talk about work, everything I learned about working was picking potatoes, because everything else seems so much easier than that.
I was going to say, so if you didn't see another potato the rest of your life, right? Lieutenant Governor Bysiewicz, it was great to see you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for this great audience. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you to our audience who came out to the Hartford Public Library in downtown Hartford. What a beautiful space. Thank you to the library for helping to coordinate this event. Thank you to West Hartford Community Interactive for live streaming our special event. Special thanks to our sponsors, once again, the Mohegan Tribe, Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Eversource, Clifton Larson Allen, the Causeway Agency, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, and Rowthorne Law. I'd like to thank all the folks on our Connecticut Mirror team, including Bruce Putterman, Elizabeth Hamilton, Chris Nilsson, Claire Dignan, Irene Mackey, Gabby DeBenedictis, Brianna Nelson. Brianna puts all this stuff together, so thank you to her. We hope you can join us for our next installment of In the Room. It's with State Comptroller Sean Scanlon. Inland. It's Wednesday, December 4th at the Guilford High School Performing Arts Center. That's exciting. I've never been to the Guilford High School Performing Arts Center. Information on that will be posted on our events page at ctmirror.org. Of course, when you go to ctmirror.org, you can feel free to make a donation to support independent journalism. Thank you all so much for coming out, and please drive home safely. Susan, thank you. That was great. I really appreciate it.